Welcome. It's so nice to see those of you that are here. My name is Betsy Winter, and I'm the Director of Community Support for Return to Zero Hope. And I'm really honored to introduce Jill Koppmeyer today as our webinar presenter. I've had the honor of working with Jill as she is the lead facilitator for Return to Zero Hope's monthly drop-in consult groups for the hospital providers. In addition, Jill is the Director of Wellbeing and Bereavement Services at Northwest Community Hospital. And she's been a nurse for 25 years, 17 of which were as a labor and delivery nurse. And she's been working at Northwest Community Hospital in Chicago since 1997. She was the perinatal, palliative, and bereavement care coordinator for Northwest Community Hospital from 2015 to 2022. And she served as the chair of the Alliance of Perinatal Bereavement and Palliative Care Facilitators of Northern Illinois from 2016 to 2022. Additionally, if this wasn't enough already, she did recently graduate with a master's degree in thanatology, the study of death, dying, and bereavement. She has spent much of her career, obviously, through all this good work, focusing solely on supporting and advocating for families on the continuum of loss. And today, we're fortunate to have Jill in our presence to talk with us about the Forgotten Grievers, the surviving siblings, and how best to provide integrative support for them and their grieving families. I wanted to offer the gentle reminder that we will always have time for Q&A following her presentation. So please make note of any questions that you might have. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jill. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you so much, Betsy. I'm really, really happy to be here and really eager to open up the discussion around children and grief, because it's like in the title says, it's forgotten a lot of times. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if you give me a second. All right. Can everybody see? You got it, Betsy?
Yes, you are good to go.
Okay, so before we start the webinar, I just want to take a moment just for all of us to take a deep breath and center ourselves. Whether you're here as a provider or a parent, talking about children's grief can be heavy. I will encourage everyone to pause and take a few deep breaths. Feel your body in the space that it's in before we begin. Before I start with some of the content, I just wanted to take a moment and pause to honor this sweet baby Julia and her big sister. So this is the first family I had ever worked with siblings. I was still a labor and delivery nurse, and her mom really wanted her big sister to come in. Her big sister had been present for all of the planning, and she wanted her to have some time. Now, this was back in 2010-ish, and I was like, yes, we have to do this. This is the right thing to do. There wasn't a ton of research out there about this, and it wasn't super welcoming, even inside the community of perinatal loss. But I wanted to do this because I knew it was important to the family. And I brought her big sister back there, and she was 2.5 at the time. And I remember getting some dirty looks from some of the staff nurses, like they thought I was crazy to allow a child into this space. And it was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever had the honor of witnessing in my career. And that really started opening my eyes to the possibilities for the siblings involved in perinatal loss. So I just want to thank them and their family for allowing me to be present for that. So when we look at perinatal loss across the continuum, right, we all understand that it is a big shift over the last 25, 30 years. 40 years ago, parents weren't often even offered the opportunity to see their baby, let alone siblings. Some siblings were never even told about the baby that died, whether that was before their birth or after, because it wasn't an option to include them in the process. Over the past 8 to 10 years, a lot of things have changed. There's more research, there's more data, and there's more providers talking about how are we including these siblings in this experience. I feel strongly that it should be a standard of care to offer the inclusion of children in the hospital. I bet not everybody would agree with me, but I believe in my deepest parts of my soul that should be something offered to parents routinely. So when we talk about honoring the sibling relationship, I will be focusing solely on siblings today, but we all understand that children's grief and perinatal loss goes beyond that. This includes friends, children's, cousins, basically any child who is looking forward to the addition of this new baby. But for now, we're going to focus it on siblings with the understanding that it can be applied to all of the children. Interesting that when we talk about having a baby, we include the children in it, the appointments, the ultrasounds, the plannings, the decorating of the room. The siblings are typically involved. But if something bad happens and that baby dies, we need to quote unquote shield them. Adults in the relationship with the baby are all offered the opportunity to honor that relationship. But a lot of times children don't have the privilege of getting to honor their sibling relationship, and that is a vital relationship in their journey. So it's really important for us to open this discussion and really just ask some thoughtful questions. Why are children not always included? Some of that comes from society. If you are a parent, you probably understand that society doesn't want to talk about death, let alone the death of a child. So it brings more challenges when we're also talking about bringing children into the space of death. Parents' initial response is to protect their children, and it is something innate that I've witnessed in so many people. And it's just their initial gut says, no, I have to protect them. I don't want them to feel this pain. In addition to that, healthcare providers also have preconceived notions. Like I talked about when I walked that sibling past the nurse's station, how many glares I got. But I do believe that with education and the right guidance and support, these moments between families and siblings can be really transformational for everybody. So it's important to remember a lot of times the first response a parent will give is not going to happen. And right in those moments, it's important to take a step back, be in an acceptance to facilitate deeper conversations within the family. You have to establish trust before you move on and offer things like including siblings. And we also have to honor that at the end of the day, even if we feel passionately about it, we have to honor a parent's choice, whether that be yes or no. And we have to honor that that parent knows that child deeper than any of us in the room. But as I said, when we as healthcare providers provide guidance and support, this will decrease the family's fear. It will decrease their anxiety. And really a lot of reassurance in that foundational relationship the parent has with the child, that they do have the capacity to do this with their child. Every child is different and unique, so it's important to remember that. You may have some siblings that are divided. Maybe two siblings want to come in and participate and the other sibling doesn't. It's important to assess those factors and really meet families where they're at without judgment. Sorry, my throat's getting dry. So I wanted to present a case study and talk about this family that I met 2 years ago almost. So this mom came in and she was going to deliver her baby because she was very, very sick. Mom was sick and she had to deliver her baby early, and the baby could not survive outside without a massive amount of intervention, which the family did not want to do for her. So she had 3 living children, and this was over a weekend, so I wasn't at work, but I kept getting calls from work saying mom was in distress. She didn't know what to do. The staff nurses were talking about including the siblings. She wanted to, but she felt very torn that she couldn't expose them to death in this manner. So we spent probably 2 hours through the weekend over the phone about talking about what it would look like, talking about the options that the children would have, talking about what I've learned from other families through these experiences. And with more guidance and more reassurance, she knew that this is what she wanted to do, but she was so scared. Her husband was not on board. He did not think the children should be in there, but I encouraged them to keep having the discussions, and he honored how important it was to Mom and said, okay, you can do this. I just don't know if I can be fully engaged in this scenario. So if you see on the bottom right hand corner, that is me and the scrubs. And then we also had the assistance of a child life specialist. And she was just there to help me with memory making with the children and really engage with the children. What was interesting, the family brought in a photographer who took these pictures. And right before we had brought the children in, I talked to Mom about how we're talking to children, what language we're using, to be sure we're not saying the baby's sleeping, because children at this age take that very literally. We don't want to say we lost her, and we're going to get into that a little later. But I went over with the mom about all of this, and her photographer friend comes in, and the two little girls were literally fighting over their baby sister, and it was just a sweet moment. But the littlest one, she was 3.5. She said, is she going to wake up? And the photographer goes, no, she's sleeping. And my heart just sunk like, no, those are all the things we just said not to say, but we didn't say that to her photographer friend. So the mom looks at me, and right, just in what all of the research says, the 3-year-old little girl looks at Mom and I and goes, well, when is she going to wake up? And that is just one reason why we have to use concrete language with children. And that was just a shining example of it. The other thing I want to point out here is if you look at the big brother, he was not on board. He did not want to participate. And if that was another case, I would have probably encouraged Mom to honor that and maybe have him be with Dad. But the mom really wanted him there and really wanted him in some pictures. So he never held her. But if you see in the bottom right, he did participate in memory making. He was not as welcoming and opening as the girls, but he did eventually partake in some of the memory making with his little sister, which was also a beautiful moment. So when we're opening the dialogue, I had mentioned we have to establish trust, right? A lot of these families are coming into the hospital and you're just meeting them. They're very overwhelmed with some terrible news, depending on how long they've had to process this news. This is not a conversation that should happen right when they walk in the door. They need time, they need space. You need to really assess where their level of shock is, how much they're processing, probably not much, and work on establishing trust before we are moving into deeper discussions like this. When you feel the time is right and you've kind of established trust in a relationship, it's important to assess, are there siblings? Are there cousins? What do they know so far? How deeply have they been involved in the planning? And when you bring that option of bringing the baby to them, explain to them that I'm going to say 90% of parents, their initial reaction is like, are you crazy? I could never do that. So reassuring them that it's a normal response for families. And then if they're open to diving deeper, right, you can start explaining that part of this whole experience for families is to create memories and honor relationships. And everybody should have that opportunity, whether that's a grandmother, a parent, an aunt, a cousin, a sibling. And we can explain different options for pictures with them, bonding time, memory making. Sharing previous experiences of other children also helps calm that initial stress response down. One of my favorite pieces of language to use with families is what I've learned from other families, and then fill in the blank, right? That siblings typically do way better than adults do. And it can be a beautiful moment. It can be meaningful, not only for the siblings, but also for the parents. And in all of my career of doing this with families, I haven't had a parent regret bringing their child in, but I have had parents regret not bringing their child in. And right, a lot of times I relate this back to that memory making and photography. We can't go back on these things. And that's a really hard thing. And it's important for providers to understand when we're talking to parents about this, that we offer that and explain we can't go back, but also if they're not ready, we can't push them too much. When you're looking at the family's grief for parents, and if there are parents on the call, I know Betsy is a bereaved mom also. I don't know if you guys would agree with me, but I feel deeply personally that watching your child grieve can be one of the most painful things to witness. So it's understandable that this is brought with a lot of anxiety and fear. And there's really no easy way to navigate this other than through honesty and openness and dialogue, right? Like talking through our fears, talking through our worries, talking through options. But it's important for us to remind parents that parents are modeling healthy grief and emotional responses for kids. So with a lot of the families I've worked with, the parents are like, I have to shield them. I have to protect them. I don't want them to see me crying. And adults kind of want to shut down their grief response and their emotional response so their kids don't see them like that. And I always coach them through that because I want them to know that they are modeling that healthy grief behavior for their kids. And God forbid if their child grows up and goes through the same experience. What if their only remembrance of that experience is, my parents lost a baby and I never saw them cry. I never saw them grieve. What's wrong with me? So, right, as much as we want to protect children, it's also important for them to become a witness to our grief. Now, with that said, if you are brought to your knees, hysterically sobbing as a parent, you need a safe place to express that, and probably not alongside your other children. So if you can, have another adult come support you or come support your children in those moments. But if you are having a moment and you are crying and you are sad and you are missing your baby, it is okay to explain to your children, mommy's sad. Mommy really misses fill in the blank, whatever your child's name is. Children are very intuitive. So even if you're trying to hide something, they are going to know that something is wrong with their parent. They might not be able to articulate it. They might not be able to understand it, but they know there is pain going on. And a lot of times they will make up stories in their head. And a lot of those revolve around their behavior and they can assume blame. So it's important for parents to be able to say, mommy's sad or mommy's angry, and really name the emotions. So when we're talking about a small child, they will not be able to understand what all those emotions are. So when you're naming them, they can then start to correlate the emotions with the physical responses that they're witnessing. And it's going to help them learn as they're navigating their own emotions. About including children at the hospital, it's important to ensure there's another supportive adult present. We want the parents to be able to be parents, be able to support their child. But if it goes not as planned, there's another adult that can take that child out of the space. Enlist your help of your bereavement coordinators if you have them, a social worker, or a child life specialist. It's best to have parents have the discussion with kids versus somebody else, if that's possible. And a lot of parents want support for this, even if it's a provider sitting in the room and pitching in every once in a while. Some parents will have this discussion before coming to the hospital. Some will have it at bedside. Some will have dad have the discussion prior to coming in the room. It's really an open and fluid discussion, and you got to figure out what the needs are and what the dynamics of the family are. It's important to answer questions honestly and openly and allow time for the children to explore and be involved. As you saw in our first case study, Those children were allowed to be in the space. They were allowed to hold their baby. They were allowed to touch her. They were allowed to kiss her. They were allowed to do memory making. And right, 2 of the girls were all in and the one brother was not. And that was okay. We let him have his space. And as he was ready, he started joining. So it's important to give time and space and honor each relationship and understand that not everybody's going to respond the same. Children can help with footprints. They can do art canvases with their baby's footprints or their handprints. They can read books to their sibling and then taking pictures and photos to capture the moment. A lot of these siblings are younger and they're probably not going to remember all of this. So to have those pictures to look back on so they know that they were involved with their little brother or sister. Just gonna take a quick drink. Now, for some of the parents on the call, this may have not been an option for you at the hospital, but there are still many ways that you can include your children in on this grief journey now and as your grief evolves. It's really never too late to include your children. Some of the best advice I was given personally when my son was less than 2 was to follow their lead. We're going to see his behavior. We're going to see his comfort level, and we as parents are going to follow the lead. And nothing more true could have happened. It's important to talk about their sibling and give space for them to talk about their sibling. Now, a lot of times with those younger preschool age kids, this could mean in the middle of the grocery store, they bring this up. And if there are any parents, I'm sure you have experienced this at some point. It's like the most inopportune time when I had a family tell me they're sitting in line at the grocery store and her son looks over to the person behind him and goes, I have a brother that died, right? But he really just wanted to tell that person that. And his mom honored that and then engaged in some discussion. But it's important that parents and siblings have the space to talk about this. When you're ready to show them photos or mementos, it's nice to have those tangible things for them to look at. If it's an option, have them be a part of the funeral services. But again, remember having another safe adult there responsible for that child so the parents can focus on attending the services. As time passes and birthdays or anniversaries come up, include your baby that's passed, right? Whether that be your birthday or siblings' birthdays, find different ways of including them. And if it's an anniversary of your loss, include their living siblings in that. So I want to talk a little bit about grief responses in relation to children's age. Now, this kind of goes mostly by chronological age, but we also have to take into account where the child is at developmentally. We all understand that not all children fit into these boxes. So we talk chronologically, but also developmentally is very important. When we're looking at babies and toddlers, a lot of people will tell you babies and toddlers don't grieve. And this is not true. They don't grieve like we do. And children, in fact, don't grieve like we do, which is why they often are becoming the forgotten grievers, because their grief looks so different to adults than adult grief looks. So babies obviously don't understand the concept, but they're responding to a change in the environment. When I said children are intuitive, this even goes down to babies and toddlers. They sense something in the environment that is off, and they know that their family members or care providers are experiencing something. Sometimes they will be irritable, very clingy, go through regression. It's important that these young children have consistent caregivers and routine. This will make a very positive impact on how their body and minds respond. So oftentimes this can't be mom in those initial moments. So maybe it's another support person. Maybe it's mom's partner. Maybe it's a grandparent that's there consistently. But having a handful of consistent caregivers will deeply impact. When we're talking about preschool age children, permanence is still not understood, and they have a lot of magical thinking. So their minds make up very, very interesting stories. And these are the children we want to be especially sure to be using concrete words. As hard as it is for parents to use those words of your sister died, your brother is dead, it's very vital to use them and to develop your language around them. Children don't understand what that means, but you can explain. That means baby sister's heart stopped beating. That means she couldn't take a breath, and you need to breathe to have oxygen. We want to avoid, we lost your baby sister was sick. These children can then worry about, well, will this happen to me if I get sick? And if we lost your baby sister, well, what do? We go find them. Just as that case study, when the photographer said she's sleeping, her immediate response was, well, when is she going to wake up? Because I know when I go to sleep, I wake up in the morning. Preschool children can suffer with tantrums, withdrawal, and also regression, just like those younger children. You might see changes in sleeping and eating patterns. And it's really important, again, to maintain routine, encourage play, provide comfort, and then name your grief, right? So if mom or dad or partner is crying, name your emotions, name why they are coming out as tears. Graduating into school-age children, they have a deeper understanding and are definitely more inquisitive. Now, school age is a wide range. So, right, 5-year-olds could be overlapping into that preschool, and the tweens could be overlapping into the teens. But they definitely have a deeper understanding and can be definitely more inquisitive. And I've never been in a room where I haven't been like surprised by something that comes out of one of these children's mouths, because you're like, oh, that's where their brain is. A lot of times, the school-age children are the ones that are going to assume blame. Maybe they weren't really excited about having a baby and didn't tell anybody. So now they're worried that because they weren't excited, their baby sibling died. So it's important to remind them that this is not their fault. This is not their responsibility. This is nothing they had control over. You might see physical complaints, not wanting to go to school, some anger, changes in eating and sleeping patterns, withdrawal, anxiety. You want to be sure to maintain routine and boundaries with these children. You're going to see routine as a common thread along these, and it's very helpful and very vital in the midst of grief. So sometimes, even if it feels too soon for you, these children might want to go back to school sooner than you imagine, because that is their safe routine and they want to live in that routine. So you'll need to see where your child is at and support them based on that. Again, answering honestly and modeling your grief for them, encouraging play and activity. So the common thread between younger children and early school age children, their language is not developed in the same way ours is. So they don't have the words to describe how they're feeling. So a lot of times we encourage play and creativity, whether that be art, music, dancing, to encourage them to be able to express their emotions. A lot of times it will come out on a piece of paper with their markers, and maybe they will draw a family, maybe they will draw about being sad, and it's easier for them to articulate through that. When we're talking about teens, obviously teenagers understand permanence. Their developmental stage does make it hard to ask for help and does make it hard to express their emotions, right? They're really developmentally working on moving away from their parents and navigating that independence and probably having some sort of attitude at that time. So they're taking on some adult responsibilities. Sometimes they can start acting out, isolate themselves, taking more risk-taking behaviors. It's something that teenagers do automatically, but that might intensify. They might also have physical symptoms and dreams, and struggles with their self-esteem. It's really, really important to maintain boundaries, especially with teenagers, because they will push your boundaries because it's what they're supposed to be doing anyway. So maintaining those healthy boundaries, modeling healthy coping, talking about grief and what to expect, right? So a teenager knows what grief is. But if they've never experienced it, they've never had the physical feelings. So you can tell them, this is what it feels like. This is how your body is expressing your emotion. It's okay to be crying. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to not be crying. Any of those responses will help normalize their feelings. So a lot of parents in our support group come in and they don't know how to begin the conversation. They don't know how to talk about things. Maybe they didn't have their children at the hospital and they've been pretty quiet at home about the loss. So how do we begin that conversation? And again, there is no right or wrong. There is no easy way to navigate. For some families, this is a natural progression and it's just always talked about. I find that when it's just a part of your everyday life, it becomes more integrated into your family. But for those who have not had the discussion, how do we sit down and have that discussion? Many kids will have honest, straightforward questions immediately. And I will encourage everybody to answer those in the most honest, age-appropriate way. Again, if parents are trying to not be fully forthcoming, the children are going to sense something. And remember, you are teaching your children the foundations of grief. And it's important to make that sibling a part of their everyday life if that's what you're choosing. Important, well, before we touch on all of this slide, I'm going to generalize most siblings are between the age of 2 and 10. I know I've been there with teenage siblings, but the majority of siblings, I would say between 2 and 10 years old. So it's important to ensure you're in a safe space. Home is ideal, but like I said, these questions and conversations come up in random places like the grocery stores. But again, very important to be open and honest. Inform other caregivers or loving adults in your child's family that you are having these open discussions. This goes for school too. We know a lot of these children are at school sometimes longer than they are with parents or family. So bringing the school in, knowing that they know what happened within the family. And even as time goes on, right? Let's say this happened when your child was 3 and your baby is still very integrated in your life. If they go to first grade and they're going to draw a family picture, they're most likely going to include their sibling that died. And however that comes out in the picture, if the teacher knows, the teacher can support that child through that. But if the teacher doesn't know, there are probably going to be some more questions. So being upfront and getting that school involved for that support. Again, open and honest on their developmental level, using those concrete words, avoiding the euphemisms, using the word death, died, dead. I know that might feel really uncomfortable in your body to hear that, but in the long run, it's going to be beneficial. And if anybody has had toddlers, we know that they can ask a lot of questions, especially that 3, 4, 5 age. So I always suggest to answer the question as simply as you want and see what comes next. If there's no other questions, you can leave it at that. If they continue asking, answer the question, see what comes next. And just kind of see where the conversation goes and take their lead. You're going to have a better understanding of what's in their brain and what needs to be talked about. When we're talking about burial or cremation, we know that, again, these are not easy topics for adults to talk about, so it's not going to be easy to talk about with children. Be prepared for matter-of-fact questions about the baby's body, right? Can they see? Can they eat? Can they open their eyes, right? All of those things that children equate bodily functions with life. So when we're talking about death, we can explain, when you're dead, you don't feel anything anymore, right? You can't feel a hug. You can't feel pain. You can't open your eyes. You can't eat food. And then instill your belief system in that. So whether that is you believe your baby is in heaven, then you can add in that piece of it with the concrete words and facts. Their body is not working anymore, but we believe their soul and their spirit is, and then fill in the blank. When we're talking about burial, you can say all of the things that are on this slide. Our baby went into a special box, and this is for burial. And that box is buried in the ground in a place called the cemetery. Now, a lot of families are bringing the children to the cemetery. So as these questions come up, you can be like, this is where she's buried. Her body was in a box. We have whatever you put with her inside. You can share all of that with them. Or if they haven't been to a cemetery but have seen one, or you're on your drive, you can point one out. That's where a cemetery is, and that's where people bury their loved ones after they die. And then explaining cremation is a little bit different because some people want their children cremated, and you will often have ashes at home. So you can explain that their body is taken to a building called a crematorium, and inside that building, there's a lot of heat, and it turns the body into what we call ashes. Ashes are like sand, but they don't look like the sand we see at the beach. This is something I used with my 3-year-old. He had a lot of questions about my father's ashes. He had just turned not even 3, and he wanted to know where his body was. And I did the whole like answer the question, see what happens. And he just kept asking and asking and asking. So I kept answering. And right, it got to, I explained everything. And then he was like, well, what's cremation? And he was very into Star Wars at a young age, and they cremate Darth Vader. So I used that as a reference because he knows and understands what that looked like. And then we were almost done, or so I thought. And he's like, well, can I see the ashes? And I said, of course. And then it went to, can I touch the ashes? And I said, of course. And after that, he never asked another question about it. But he really had a need to understand and put it in his brain. I wanted to also touch on siblings born after a loss, because a lot of parents go through this where maybe their first baby was their loss. And then they went on to have children after their loss who did not have an opportunity to meet or see or know or be part of the planning. And it comes as a surprise to providers, but the majority of siblings that are born after a loss do grieve. And we shouldn't assume that because they didn't know this person, that they're not going to grieve them along their journey, because they are grieving that relationship that they won't ever get to have. This is also very individualized. One child may feel this deeply, the other sibling may not. But it is important to tell children about the loss before their sibling. I did meet somebody once, and he said he has to be in probably his 60s now. But he said his whole life he grew up and he felt like something was missing, and he couldn't put his finger on it. And it wasn't until his mid-30s that his mom told him about his baby sister that died at birth. And that feeling went away. He always knew that there was something missing. And he was so glad he finally told her, but he said, I wish I would have known way earlier than when I was told. Now, this was back when, it wasn't discussed and wasn't talked about, but he definitely felt something was not right. So depending on how central your child that has died is in your everyday life, like that's going to elicit different reactions. If you are a family that has your child buried and goes to the cemetery monthly, and you are bringing that new sibling there, obviously it's going to be integrated in a different way than if you're not talking about them frequently. So you kind of have to base this on how that baby is already integrated into your life. And I've worked with so many families with children who experience deep grief for their sibling born before them. There are a couple books out there that I would recommend. One is called My Baby Big Sister, and it's talking about, I have a baby big sister who is not here. She was born before and she died. And then there's another book, and it's called Mommy Says I Have a Brother. There's also Says I Have a Sister version. And I think those are also great ways for introducing loss to a sibling born after loss. We're getting to the end, but I want to acknowledge some process called re-grieving. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but not only children do this, adults can do this, but it's very, very common within children. So re-grieving essentially is, as a child grows up, we understand their grief is directly related to their age and development, because those language skills that we talked about are different at each stage, right? If we're imagining a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, their language expression is completely different. It evolves, it grows bigger, they're able to name emotions, and they're also able to express differently. So as they acquire new language skills, they're going to be processing their grief in a different way. Their worldview opens up. They're seeing things differently. They're imagining relationships with their sibling differently. So it's important to keep this conversation open and take time to understand how their grief is changing and evolving through each developmental stage, right? A 5-year-old child might be missing his baby brother running around and fighting and playing at the playground with. Or at 16, he's missing, I don't have that little brother to push around or show him the ropes and navigate teenage life or go for a fast ride in a car. So it changes at their wedding, right? When the living sibling is getting married and they don't have their sibling at their side, right? All of that grief is going to keep evolving as they keep evolving as humans. To share a few more just short stories about these families. The top left, that was a teenage sibling, and she had a little brother who was 10 who did not want to come. So the parents and I sat down with both siblings and we discussed all of their options. And the big sister said, I need to be there. I want this. And the little brother said, I can't do it. And we gave him some more options and some more education just to make sure he was certain and grounded in his decision. And he stuck with it and said, no, I can't. So grandma stayed with him and everybody else went with the older sibling. So that is a good representation of how we need to honor all children. The middle one, another sibling, she was 9 years old at the time. She had a teenage sister who it was kind of the opposite. The younger one was very involved. The teenage sister was present, but way more hesitant. Down in the bottom right corner, also we had 2 siblings here, but the older sibling was very nervous. She has anxiety, so grandma stayed with her and younger one came with us so they could all be together. And then in the bottom left is sweet little Isabella with her baby brother. And she was 9 at the time, but probably the wisest, most mature 9-year-old I've ever come across. And her mom was in the hospital for many days. So we got to spend probably 5 days with Isabella. And it was just so magical having her be present, having her be not only supportive to her parents, but her parents supporting her, and really just creating these beautiful relationships between her and her baby brother. She doesn't have any living siblings and probably won't ever. So this was really important to them. It was really interesting also because this baby's mom, her mom had a full-term stillborn baby and didn't actually get to meet him. So her mom was also present and caring for and, participating in the memory making with this family too. And I think that experience was healing for her. But Isabella really took an active role. She changed him, she dressed him, she took pictures. Here she's doing footprints. And I just talked to her mom yesterday, and she actually graduated junior high. And she had a bracelet, and mom had a bracelet, and baby had a bracelet, and she wore her bracelet to graduation. So, right, she's still finding ways to include her baby brother. One of the hard things with her was that they were a deeply religious family, and she point blank looked at me with her very frank questions, and she said, listen, I have prayed to God and prayed to God and prayed to God for a baby brother. and he gave me a baby brother, and I was so excited, and now he took him away from me. And those are really, really tough questions to answer. When it comes to religion, I try and take the lead from the parents, but also have the capacity to share my knowledge and my experience in navigating those conversations, but they're never easy because there's no answer to this. Some additional resources on here. For providers, Return to Zero Hope has materials that you can purchase to give to parents when talking about including siblings and supporting siblings. The second one is the National Alliance for Grieving Children, which has a lot of good resources, along with the Dougie Center. In November, I think it's the first Tuesday or the Tuesday or Thursday before the Thanksgiving is Children's Grief Awareness Day. So there's some information there. And then a lost mom wrote a very beautiful article about explaining cremation to young children at Still Standing magazine. So I would highly encourage, if you have questions or you want to explore that further or have that as a resource as a provider, I would encourage you to look through that. And we'll just take another moment. I know this is a lot of information. There's a lot to process, a lot to carry. So just take a moment to honor the space that you're in and honor yourselves as you bring this knowledge to your family, or you bring this knowledge to some families that you're working with as providers. I'm really thankful that you are all here today for this discussion. If you can't tell, I'm very passionate about it. And I think there are beautiful ways that we can continue to help support these forgotten grievers.
Thank you, Jill. I realized I was having some technical struggles throughout that with how it was set up. So I was captivated by what you shared and just have deep appreciation as a bereaved parent who had a surviving sibling and a subsequent sibling following the death of my daughter, for the work that you do and for this webinar, because it really is by far one of the most difficult things I experienced with my surviving sibling was to have that discussion and to figure out how to integrate our daughter into his life, my life, and now my subsequent daughter's life as well. So thank you. And we would love to open it up to questions. And Jill, you get to enable the chat. So if you go to chat down on that, I think if you hit that little arrow, you should be able to enable chat as the host. Okay. Do you see that?
No. So I have the chat open.
Do you see where it has the mute, stop video, participants, chat? There's like the little arrow.
Yes.
If you click on that arrow, it will say show chat previews and maybe enable chat.
It just says show chat previews.
So does mine. Okay.
Now, when it opens up, now if I click on attendees, I think it's just showing me.
Okay, so 4 questions. If you would like, I believe if you raise your hand, we can allow you to talk and ask your question if you're comfortable with that, since we are not sure how to enable chat. Okay, Eileen, I'm gonna come to you. Let's see if this works. Yes. Perfect.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much, Jill. And I'm whispering because I'm at the library.
Okay, that's okay.
Jill, thank you so much. You had a slide that said, do not use words like sick, sleeping, lost. It also includes the word angel. And I was wondering if you can elaborate on the angel piece.
So it's funny, I don't remember putting that in there. But that's more directed at, are you a provider or a parent, Eileen?
Both.
Okay, so when I educate our providers on using the word angel, it's not a word that I should come to a parent and present. If a parent is using that word, it's okay and safe for me to use that word, but I, as a provider, can't assume that this family sees their baby as an angel.
Got it.
But as a parent, right, if that's the language you choose around your belief system, 100%, that is okay.
Right. So following their lead.
Yes, yes. Right. Using the concrete words and saying, right, like mom believes that she is an angel in heaven. I'm paraphrasing your words,
Right.
but
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Arlene. Mary Ann, can I go ahead and allow you to talk? Mary Ann, are you there? Let's see if that works. Are you there? Mary Ann? Hi.
Felt like she was coming on.
I know, yes. Okay. Mary Ann, if you decide you'd like to speak again, just go ahead and you can raise your hand one more time. I'll go ahead and disable. You can let us know if you do want to talk. Is there anyone else with questions?
Do you know if they can see the chat or no?
The chat is disabled, but there's not a way that
Yeah.
I've seen on this end to enable it.
Yeah. I'm going to just tell them my email in case anybody wants to email me questions.
That's a great idea. I think they might be able to, yeah, you can put that in there.
So
can
it's
put it in our
essentially-
follow-up too.
okay. So it's essentially J and then my last name Kottmeyer at N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie, H as in Henry.org. So feel free to email any questions and I'd be happy to continue the discussion.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Jill. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you in other webinars, workshops, drop-in consultations for hospital providers or mental health providers. And if you need any other resources, please reach out to Jill, or you can always email me as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.